بقول له يا سيد أنا رجعت على لبنان، أتمنى إنك ترجع كمان على لبنان.
قرار صادر من مجلس الجامعة تسمية حزب الله الإرهابي.
Good afternoon, you're watching the English newscast on Future Television. I'm Linda Tamim, and these are today's top stories. A massive manhunt is underway for a suspect seen with two supposed suicide bombers responsible for the Belgium attacks. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri calls on Free Patriotic Movement lawmakers to officially elect a president as a session to elect a new head of state is adjourned for the 37th time. And Prime Minister Tamam Slam shares a meeting at the Grand Sarai to discuss the issue of illegal internet networks. A massive manhunt is underway for a suspect seen with two supposed suicide bombers shortly before they struck Brussels' Zaventem airport in the first of two attacks that also hit the city's metro, killing at least 30 and wounding more than 200. Belgian broadcaster RTBF named two of the suspects as brothers, Khalid and Brahim Bakrawi, who are known to police for their involvement in organized crime. Crowds of mourners gathered outside Maalbeek station, one of the targets of the attacks, to observe a minute of silence as the country began 3 days of national mourning. Belgian Prime Minister Charles Michel described the bombings as the deadliest attacks ever seen in Belgium. The Islamic State claimed responsibility. World leaders have condemned the attacks in Brussels. U.S. President Barack Obama says the U.S.-led coalition will continue hitting Islamic State militants after the deadly attacks in Belgium.
One more example of why the entire world has to unite against these terrorists. The notion that any political agenda would justify the killing of innocent people like this is something that's beyond the pale. We are going to continue with the over 60 nations that are pounding ISIL and going to go after them. In the meantime, obviously, our thoughts and prayers are with those who've been lost and hoping for a speedy recovery for those who've been injured. It's always a challenge when you have a terrorist attack anywhere in the world, particularly in this age of 24/7 news coverage. You want to be respectful and understand the gravity of the situation. But the whole premise of terrorism is to try to disrupt people's ordinary lives.
Still in the U.S., Democratic presidential frontrunner Hillary Clinton reacted by saying her country and its allies should work to better coordinate intelligence and increase the security near airports and other soft targets. Clinton also said U.S. officials should avoid actions and rhetoric that imply the country is at war with an entire religion, saying that it would be dangerous to her nation, in her words.
Well, we were reminded again this morning, weren't we, about how important it is to have a steady, smart, strong approach toward keeping us safe. That is exactly what I believe the United States has to offer, whatever help we can to Belgium and the other European countries. But we have to work closely together with our friends and our allies, and we have to form coalitions of nations willing to defeat ISIS with us. And so when I think about what we have to do, I see the challenge ahead as one where we're bringing the world together, where we are leading the world against these terrorist networks. Whereas some of my opponents want to build walls and shut the world off. Well, you tell me, how high does the wall have to be to keep the internet out? Right? You know, that's not the world we live in any longer. We got to take them on the internet. We need our great tech companies to be helping us do this. We have to shut their sites down. We have to intervene where we can to prevent radicalization of homegrown terrorism. And we need everybody on the front lines, everybody, particularly, I will add, American Muslims, because they're the ones who should be calling the FBI and law enforcement to say something suspicious is going on. I want them to feel like they are part of our defense, not that they're being insulted and isolated and left out, which will be dangerous to us. That doesn't make sense, my friends.
For his part, U.S. Republican presidential candidate Ted Cruz has called for stepped-up patrols in Muslim neighborhoods to prevent radicalization. His comments came at a news conference in New York to clarify an earlier written statement that was roundly criticized by his Democratic rivals and others on the day of the attacks in Brussels.
It's important to understand what happened today was not a lone wolf. It was not an isolated attack, but it was an act of war. It was an act of war carried out by radical Islamic terrorists. ISIS has claimed responsibility for this attack. We need to be directing our efforts at stopping that from happening, stopping isolated communities from festering jihadism. We need to work proactively with the Muslim community, cooperatively, just like when law enforcement is going after gang activity, you work with the community where gangs are located to prevent those acts of violence. In this case, we're not talking about criminal activity, we're talking about acts of war. Political correctness costs lives. And it is standard law enforcement, it is good law enforcement, to focus on where threats are emanating from, and anywhere where there is a locus of radicalization, where there is an expanding presence of radical Islamic terrorism. We need law enforcement resources directed there. We need national security resources directed there. The object should be to keep Americans safe, to keep everyone safe. Hey, listen, I understand that those in the media are horrified that anyone would actually speak the truth about radical Islamic terrorism. I will apologize to nobody with how vigorous I will be as president, fighting radical Islamic terrorists, and our hearts and our prayers go out.
And now for some news in Lebanon. A session to elect a new head of state was adjourned for the 37th time after lawmakers failed once again to secure the needed quorum due to a sharp rift between political blocs. With just 63 MPs in attendance, Speaker Nabih Berri was once again compelled to adjourn the session until April 18th. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri, who was one of the first MPs to arrive at the Parliament building, has called on Free Patriotic Movement lawmakers to officially elect a president instead of taking their demands to the streets to force a change in the current political situation. I share the same opinion as Berri that electing a president would resolve some of the country's troubles, Hariri said, describing the ongoing boycott by the FBM and Hezbollah as unacceptable. MP Michel Aoun is seeking parliamentary elections before presidential vote because he believes the current parliament is unconstitutional and no longer represents the Lebanese people after its term was extended twice. He is also demanding a new electoral law based on proportional representation with Lebanon as a single constituency. Prime Minister Tamam Slam has chaired a meeting at the Grand Sarai to tackle the issue of illegal internet networks. Several officials took part in the meeting, including Defense Minister Samir Muqbil, Prosecutor General Judge Samir Hamoud, Internal Security Forces Chief Brahim Basbous, and Intelligence Department Chief Kamil Dahir. Telecommunications Minister Boutros Harab has called on government officials to deal with the situation seriously outside of personal interests. He also vowed to continue investigating the existence of any other illegal internet network in the country. Former President Michel Sleiman has called on the UN Security Council to eradicate ISIS on the eve of the UN chief's visit to Lebanon. In a press conference addressed to UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, Sleiman said ISIS must be removed and this is the responsibility of the UN Security Council and the countries fighting terrorism. Ban's visit to Lebanon is scheduled for tomorrow as part of a regional tour that will take him to Jordan and Tunisia. During his speech at the gathering of the Republic headquarters in the Mount Lebanon town of Hazmiye, Sleiman criticized politicians over their failure to end the presidential vacuum. Just a reminder that lawmakers have failed to elect a new head of state since Sleiman's term ended in May of 2014. Sleiman also said it was necessary to ensure the return of Syrian refugees, as it is a priority in solving the Syrian crisis. The UN says Syria's government has given verbal assurances that aid convoys can get into 3 or 4 of the areas that its forces are besieging. The UN had received the green light for 8 or 9 of the 11 areas it had asked to deliver aid to, including 3 or 4 besieged areas, but not the towns of Daraya or Douma, where the World Food Programme said some people have been reduced to eating grass. On another note, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Russia and Germany agreed on the need for inclusive Syria peace talks in Geneva after a meeting with his German counterpart Frank-Walter Steinmeier. For his part, UN Special Envoy for Syria Staffan de Mistura said the message from the attacks in Brussels claimed by the Islamic State was that the war in Syria had to end and a political transition needed to be found so that the focus could turn to tackling the group.
We need to extinguish the fire of war in Syria. We need to find a political solution. We need a political transition in Syria in order to be able to make sure that we can all concentrate, and the Syrians can all together concentrate on what is the real danger of everyone in Europe, in the world, in Syria and elsewhere. That's the message, apart from the message of sadness, of horror, and of solidarity this time to the Belgian people and to the people of this beautiful city of Brussels, which is considered morally the capital of Europe. We are looking with great interest, expectation, hope, and strong expectation that the talks that will take place in Moscow will be productive. And obviously, not everything will be solved in one day, but productive in the right direction in order to help us to resume the talks with much more in-depth address on the issue of political transition.
Nepal battles to end child marriage. That's coming up next. Stay with us. Welcome back. Turkey has detained a Japanese citizen in the south of the country on suspicion of seeking to cross the border into Syria to join ISIS. The Dogan news agency said the young man, aged 24, was detained late on Tuesday in the Nizip district of the southern city of Gaziantep, close to the Syrian border. He will be deported from Turkey back to Japan once the investigation is completed. Leading Democratic and Republican contenders have split major wins in presidential nominating contests in Arizona and Utah. Donald Trump rolled to a victory in the Arizona Republican primary, capitalizing on his anti-immigration stance, a position that has long been popular with conservative voters in the state. With the win on Tuesday, Trump takes all of the state's 58 delegates to the Republican National Convention. He won more than 45% of the vote in Arizona, compared to about 21% for his main rival, Texas Senator Ted Cruz. In the Democratic Arizona primary, Hillary Clinton was projected to easily account for Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. The Sanders flipped the script by beating the former Secretary of State in the Utah caucuses. Nepal has one of the worst rates of child marriages in the world. In fact, UNICEF says more than 700 million women alive today were married as children, more than a third of them before the age of 15. Britain's Prince Harry delivered the keynote address at the 2016 Girls' Summit hosted in the capital Kathmandu. The event follows similar ones in Bangladesh, Uganda and Ethiopia after the first such summit held in London 2 years earlier, where commitments were made to end child, early and forced marriages.
Over the last decade, I've been hugely inspired by working alongside those striving to help young people achieve their full potential, sometimes in very difficult circumstances.
I welcome you all on behalf of the government of Nepal, and particularly the...
Or the 14-year-old girl forced out of school so she can get married here in Nepal. We need to acknowledge that so many countries and cultures are failing to protect the opportunities of young women and girls in the way they do for boys. I believe it is vitally important for men like me to acknowledge this as loudly and openly as role models do, like President Bahandri, the US First Lady Michelle Obama, and activists like Malala.
This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a recap of our top stories. A massive manhunt is underway for a suspect seen with two supposed suicide bombers responsible for the Belgium attacks. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri calls on FPM lawmakers to officially elect a president as the session to elect a new head of state is adjourned for the 37th time. And Prime Minister Tamam Slam chairs a meeting at the Grand Sarai to discuss the issue of illegal internet networks. Those are your top stories for today. I'm Lynette Samim, and I thank you all for watching.
بقول له يا سيد أنا رجعت على لبنان، أتمنى إنك ترجع كمان على لبنان.
المجلس الجامعة تسمية حزب الله الإرهابي.